The forest had a voice of its own. Every sound, the soft rustle of pine needles, the crack of frozen twigs, the whisper of the wind over snow, spoke to a man who had learned to live in silence. His name was Elias Harrow, and for 7 long years the wilderness had been his only home. He lived in a small wooden hut by the river, deep within the northern frontier. The place was lonely, far from towns and people, but Elias liked it that way. He had left the noise of the world behind long ago. The forest did not ask questions or make demands. It only asked for respect. Each day followed the same pattern. At sunrise, Elias woke to the pale glow of light filtering through the frosted window. He boiled water over the fire, drank a cup of bitter tea, and stepped outside to check his traps. His boots crunched softly on the snow as he followed the trail he had made months ago. The land was beautiful but harsh. Winters were long and the cold could bite through even the thickest coat. Yet Elias had learned its rhythm, where the deer crossed, where the foxes hid, and which frozen streams could hold a man's weight. He had no one to talk to, but he didn't mind. The world beyond these woods had given him enough reasons to stay away. That morning began like all others, quiet and gray, the sky heavy with clouds that promised more snow. Elias had just checked the second line of traps and found nothing. He moved toward the ridge where the trees thinned and the wind grew sharp. He bent low to reset a trap when a sound stopped him, faint at first, almost lost in the sigh of the wind. It was not the cry of an animal. It was higher, human, a sudden short cry that broke the silence like glass. Elias froze. His heart beat faster. He listened again, unsure if his mind was playing tricks. Then it came again, a weak, pained call. Without thinking, Elias threw down his pack and followed the sound. He moved quickly, pushing through the low branches, his boots slipping over the icy ground. The cries grew clearer, each one pulling him forward. Finally, at the edge of a clearing near a half-frozen stream, he saw her. A young woman lay on the snow, her face pale and frightened. One of her legs was trapped in a heavy iron snare, an old rusted thing left behind by poachers long ago. The cruel device had caught her ankle tightly and she was too weak to move. Her dark hair clung to her cheeks, wet with tears and snow. Elias hurried to her side. "It's all right," he said softly, kneeling beside her. "Don't be afraid. I'll help you." The woman didn't answer right away. Her breathing was shallow and her eyes darted from the trap to his face. She looked young, maybe 18 or 19, and dressed in worn clothing made from soft hide and fur. She was clearly from one of the native tribes that lived beyond the valley. Elias spoke gently as he examined the trap. It was rusted and old, but the metal teeth still bit hard. He took out a small iron rod from his bag and pressed down on the lever. It took all his strength, but the trap finally gave way. The girl gasped as her foot came free. "There," he murmured. "You're safe now." Her ankle was red and swollen, but not broken. Elias wrapped it carefully with a strip of cloth from his coat. The girl watched him silently, her eyes softening a little. She whispered something in her own language, then repeated in broken English, "Thank you." Elias smiled faintly. "You're welcome." The wind grew colder and the snow began to fall again, thick, heavy flakes that blurred the trees. The girl tried to stand, but her leg trembled. She winced in pain. Without thinking twice, Elias lifted her into his arms. She was light, and though she tried to protest, he only said, "You need warmth. My hut isn't far." He carried her through the forest, his breath fogging in the air. The snow fell harder now, covering their footprints almost as soon as they made them. By the time he reached the hut, his coat and beard were dusted white. He pushed open the door, set her gently on the wooden bed near the fire, and closed the storm out behind them. Inside, the hut was small but warm. A fire crackled in the stone hearth. There were shelves lined with jars of dried herbs, old books, and tools neatly arranged. It was the home of a man who needed little but took care of what he had. Elias poured water into a pot and placed it over the fire. Then he handed her a blanket. "You'll be fine now," he said kindly. "Rest, I'll make some tea." The girl nodded faintly. Her face was tired, but her eyes stayed fixed on him as if trying to understand this strange man who had saved her. After a few minutes, she sipped the warm tea he gave her and whispered her name. "Lonnie." "Lonnie," he repeated, the name soft on his tongue. "I'm Elias." For a while, neither spoke. The firelight danced over the rough wooden walls. Outside, the storm howled and the trees bent under the wind. Inside, there was only the soft sound of the crackling fire and the quiet rhythm of breathing. Elias checked her wound again and replaced the cloth with fresh linen. He could see that she was strong and brave. She did not cry or complain. When she caught him looking, she smiled weakly. Hours passed. Lonnie drifted in and out of sleep, whispering in her language from time to time. Elias sat near the fire, sharpening his knife, glancing at her now and then. He could not help but wonder who she was, where she came from, and why she was alone in such dangerous country. But he didn't ask. He had lived long enough to know that everyone carried their own reasons for silence. Night came early. The storm grew worse. The hut shook with the wind, but inside the fire kept them warm. Elias cooked a small meal, dried meat boiled with herbs and roots, and offered her a bowl. She ate slowly, then smiled with quiet gratitude. When she finished, he handed her another blanket and said softly, "Sleep. You're safe here." Lonnie looked around the little hut, the tools, the fire, the man who had risked himself to save her. She seemed to hesitate, as if unsure what to say. Finally, she whispered, "You good man, Elias." He gave a small smile. Just someone who was nearby, but her eyes told him she didn't believe that. To her, his act was not small. It was something rare, a light in a world that could be cold and lonely. As the night deepened, Elias sat by the window, listening to the storm. He had been alone for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to share a space with another human being. The sound of her soft breathing behind him reminded him of a life he thought he had left behind, of warmth, of purpose, of simple human connection. He told himself that when the storm ended, he would help her back to her people. That was the right thing to do. He did not know that the choice would not be his alone to make. By midnight, the storm began to fade. The world outside was buried in white silence. Lonnie stirred, whispering his name in her sleep as though she dreamed of gratitude or hope. Elias looked at her for a long time in the firelight touching her calm face, and then turned back to the window. Somewhere deep in his chest, something long quiet began to stir. A small warmth he hadn't felt in years. And in that quiet hut, surrounded by snow and silence, a story had begun. One neither of them could yet understand, but both would soon be bound by. Morning came quietly, with a pale golden light spreading across the snow outside. The storm had passed, leaving the world clean and still. The river beside the hut glittered under the weak sun, and a thin smoke rose gently from the chimney. Inside the small wooden hut, the fire had burned low, but the room was still warm. Elias woke early, as he always did, and sat up slowly. For a moment, he almost forgot what had happened the night before. Then he saw the extra blanket near the fire and remembered he was not alone. Lonnie was there, sitting on the wooden floor near the hearth. She was awake and watching the flames. Her hair was loose now, falling over her shoulders, and the light from the fire touched her face with a soft glow. When she heard Elias stir, she turned and smiled gently. "You sleep," she said in her quiet, broken English. "I make fire strong." Elias smiled faintly. "You should be resting, not working." She shook her head. "I feel better. No pain now." She lifted her bandaged leg a little to show him. The swelling had gone down, though she still moved carefully. Elias stood and poured water into a pot. "You need breakfast," he said. "There's some dried fish and oats." While he cooked, Lonnie watched him with silent curiosity. Everything about the little hut fascinated her. The tools on the wall, the shelves of jars filled with herbs and dried fruit, the few books stacked in a corner. She could tell this man lived simply but with care. When Elias handed her a wooden bowl of warm porridge, she smiled in thanks. "Good," she said after a spoonful. "You cook better than some women." He laughed softly, a sound he hadn't made in a long time. "That's the nicest thing anyone said to me in years." They ate quietly for a while, the only sound the gentle crackle of the fire. Outside, the forest seemed peaceful again. The world felt calm after the storm, as if it was holding its breath. After eating, Elias stepped outside to check the traps. The air was crisp and snow glittered under the morning sun. Lonnie followed him slowly, leaning on a stick he had carved for her as a crutch. She walked carefully, testing her strength. "You should stay inside," he said. "It's cold." "I stay too long inside," she replied, smiling. "I need to see the sky," Elias nodded. There was something strong about her, a quiet spirit that refused to be broken. She looked at the forest not with fear but with respect, as if it were a friend. They walked together for a while, saying little. At one point they stopped to watch a deer move gracefully between the trees. Its fur shone like gold in the sunlight. Lonnie's eyes softened as she whispered something in her own language, a short musical phrase. "What did you say?" Elias asked. She turned to him and said, "It means, 'May the forest bless your heart.'" He looked at her, surprised by the gentleness of her words. "That's beautiful," he said quietly. By the time they returned to the hut, the sun was high. Lonnie helped him carry wood inside, though he kept telling her to rest. She laughed at his worry, and her laughter filled the small space like music. It had been many years since the hut had known such a sound. Later, as Elias repaired a broken trap near the fire, he noticed Lonnie watching him again, not shyly, but thoughtfully. Finally she spoke. "You live alone long time?" "Yes," he said, not looking up. 7 years. Why?" she asked softly. He paused, then gave a small shrug. "Because people hurt people. Out here, the forest doesn't lie. It takes what it must and gives what it can. I understand that." Lonnie was silent for a moment, then said, "You help me. You not like those people." Elias smiled faintly but didn't answer. He was not used to being praised, and her words touched him in a quiet, unexpected way. That afternoon, Lonnie helped tidy the small hut. She moved with a quiet grace, folding blankets, sweeping the floor with a branch broom, humming softly as she worked. Elias watched her for a while, feeling something stir inside him. Not just gratitude, but a deep sense of peace he had not felt in years. When evening came, the forest outside turned gold and pink. They sat together near the door, watching the sun sink behind the trees. The world was calm, almost magical. Lonnie spoke again, her voice low. "In my people's way," she said slowly, searching for the right English words. "When one saves a life, that life belongs to the one who saves it. It is not slavery, not bad thing. It means hearts are joined. We share breath of life." Elias turned to look at her. "You don't owe me anything, Lonnie," he said gently. "You're free to go home once you're well." But she shook her head. "I not go, I stay." "My heart say stay." He was quiet. He wanted to tell her that he was not the man she thought he was, that he was no hero, just someone trying to survive in silence. But when he met her eyes, he saw something there that stopped him. There was no fear, no confusion, only calm trust. That night, as the stars came out, they shared stories. Lonnie spoke about her village by the mountain river, her parents, and the songs they sang during harvest time. Elias listened closely, feeling her words bring life to the quiet corners of his hut. When it was his turn, he spoke softly about his past, how he had once been a carpenter in a busy town, how he lost his wife to illness, and how the grief had driven him into the wilderness. He hadn't told anyone that story in years. Yet with Lonnie listening, it didn't hurt as much as it used to. "You have good heart," she said after a long silence. "But you hide it behind trees," he smiled faintly. "Maybe you're right." The fire burned low as the night deepened. Lonnie yawned, and Elias told her to sleep. Before lying down, she placed a small charm made of woven grass near the door. "For safety," she said. "My mother make like this," Elias nodded. "Thank you." She smiled, then lay down and soon fell asleep. Elias stayed awake a while longer, watching the fire fade to embers. He thought about her words, about belonging, about hearts joined by fate. He did not fully understand her way, but he felt the truth of it deep inside him. When morning came again, the sky was clear and blue. Lonnie was already awake, preparing herbs in a small pot. She greeted him with a warm smile. "You wake late today," she teased. He laughed quietly. "Maybe because someone made the hut feel like home." She looked down shyly, stirring the pot. "Then I stay," she said softly. "Until forest say go." Elias wanted to tell her that she could stay as long as she wished, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he only nodded. Somehow, she already knew. Days turned into weeks. Lonnie's leg healed completely, and she began to walk freely again. Together, they gathered firewood, fetched water, and even rebuilt part of the roof that had sagged under the winter snow. The silence that once filled the hut was now replaced by quiet laughter, shared meals, and small conversations that warmed the heart. Elias noticed how much lighter life felt. The loneliness that had once clung to him like a heavy coat began to fade. The forest was still vast and cold, but now it seemed alive in a new way, as if the trees themselves whispered blessings instead of solitude. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Elias and Lonnie stood outside, watching the river flow quietly past. The air was cool and gentle. Lonnie turned to him and said softly, "You saved me that day, but I think I also saved you." Elias looked at her, then nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, his voice warm with truth. "I think you did." The two of them stood in silence side by side, watching the last light fade. The forest around them breathed softly, and for the first time in many years, Elias felt that he was exactly where he was meant to be. He had gone into the wilderness to be alone, but life had found him there anyway, not in the form of noise or company, but in a single, quiet soul who had taught him how to live again. And as the stars appeared, their soft light shining over the hut by the river, the story of Elias and Lonnie became one with the forest itself, a story of kindness, gratitude, and the simple miracle of two hearts finding peace in a world that had forgotten them.